me to say, after Vito distorting the belt to proclaim me the real world champion, I'm going to tell you all, with a tear in my eye, this is the greatest moment in my life. When you walk around this world and you tell everybody you're number one, the only way you get to stay number one is to be number one. And this is the only title in the wrestling world that makes you number one when you are the king of the W.
And good afternoon, everybody. You are looking live at a Matinee Monday here on the Captain Lou Extravaganza here on the 12-Ounce Sports Network. Good afternoon, as I mentioned, everybody. Captain Lou here with you tonight, or this afternoon, rather, till about 2 o'clock, and we thought we would do a little Ric Flair. To be the best, you got to be the best. To be the man, you got to beat the man. And right now, kind of a tribute to the man when it comes to head coaching in the NFL. The leading winner, the man with the most wins in NFL history passed away this morning at the age of 90, that being Don Shula. And he was an icon, one of the coaches that you knew would always be on top back in the 70s and 80s and 60s. What a career for Don Shula. He started back with the Baltimore Colts back in the mid-60s, 33 years of age. He was the head coaching legend that went all the way through 1995, I believe, as the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. 33 years and 2 losing seasons. Just think about that for a second. 33 years, 2 losing seasons. Went to 6 Super Bowls, 5 with the Dolphins, and 1 with the Baltimore Colts back in the day. A 13-1 team that lost in probably the biggest upset in Super Bowl history still to this day, that 16-7 loss to the New York Jets in Super Bowl III. But he bounced back. He went again to the Super Bowl 3 times in a row in the early 70s, and of course engineered the only perfect record in Super Bowl modern history, Super Bowl era history. That team in 1972 that only won 14-7, believe it or not, to the Washington Redskins. They won that game, but then they beat the Vikings the next year and won, as I mentioned, he won 2 Super Bowls, 3 straight trips in the 70s. His first trip, the loss that they had to Dallas, 24-3, I believe it was, that's the first Super Bowl that I can remember watching. Super Bowl 6, I believe, 5 or 6, 1971. Yeah, I remember watching that on a black and white TV in our basement on a Sunday afternoon at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So, wow, an icon has passed away. 334 victories. As I mentioned, only 2 losing seasons. He took 3 different starting quarterbacks to the Super Bowl, 4 if you count Baltimore. But he had Dan Marino, who only went to 1, and that was his rookie year, crazy as it not enough as it was. And he took David Woodley as a starting quarterback a couple of years before that, and of course Bob Greasy, and I guess you could count Earl Moreland with that because he got a start. But again, Don Shula passed away at the age of 90. Only 2 losing seasons. We'll talk about Don throughout the week here on the program, and we're going to be on here this afternoon and also tomorrow night, our normal time, 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern time, and then Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock and Thursday. Not sure on Friday yet, but that one's up in the air. We'll keep you posted on that right now. So, again, want to thank everybody. Hope you've had a great week. You had a great weekend. Getting one step closer maybe to reality or a normalcy. I see that over in Korea, they're starting their professional baseball season with some stipulations, of course, one of them being no spitting, no high fives. The other one I didn't notice if they could, like some of the pitchers do now, put their fingers to their mouth and when they're off the mound. That's going to be another, we'll have to follow that one. But the Korean Baseball Organization starting their games in front of no fans this afternoon, or today. So is it one step closer? Is it reality? Is there a chance that we can possibly get professional sports back this year, before, in the summertime anyways, we'll follow that one closely. So many variables, as we've mentioned it throughout the month or so that we've been doing our afternoon shows, anyways, as we're on quarantine, the stay-at-home order, whatever you want to call it. So again, hope your weekend was good. I hope everybody's staying safe. We want to keep you here with the show for a long period of time. So again, welcome. And as we mentioned at the top, Don Shula, the legendary coach of the Miami Dolphins, passed away at the age of 90. He engineered, amongst other things, the only Super Bowl era perfect record, 14-0 regular season, and then, of course, winning the playoff games, including the Super Bowl, to go 17-0. And it's crazy. It's been, almost 50 years, 48 years since they did that. And the closest, of course, was New England, losing to in 2008 in the Super Bowl to the New York Giants. I believe it was their 2007 season, when they went 18-0 going into the Super Bowl, losing to the Giants. That tells you how difficult it is to do that. All the great teams that have been throughout the years, ironically enough, the closest maybe besides New England was that 15-1 team, the Chicago Bears, that lost to the Miami Dolphins. That's their only loss that year, was in the regular season to the Dolphins. So every year the corks are popped. And now they'll have a special salute to Don Shula this year when their undefeated record stays intact, because I don't see anybody going undefeated. It is so difficult to do, with the parity and everything. You get some great teams every once in a while, but 16-0 is just such a feat to do. And then going through the regular season into the playoffs and in the Super Bowl, as I mentioned, the Patriots were the closest team to be able to do it 12 years ago. Never say never with anything, but it's just such a tough feat to accomplish. But those are, again, just some of the feats that they were able to accomplish, or that Don Shula was able to accomplish during his lifetime. He started out as an assistant coach with Cleveland, and he was a defensive coordinator for the Lions, and then again he retired in 1995 reluctantly, with right at a day after his 66th birthday. So again, just it's just a sad day in sports. When we lose a legend like this, like Don Shula, and I know that the tributes are going to be pouring in all day, and justifiably so. He did it the right way, as he was able to. One of the things that was good about his teams, as they led the league in fewest penalties a lot of the years. And that's just one of the feats. But again, taking his teams to the playoffs just about every year, only 2 losing records in 33 years, and so that speaks volumes for how good of a coach he was. The program that he was able to build was kind of able to adapt to the coaching styles, going from the ground and pound back in the 70s to the Dan Marino type of offense back in the late 80s and whatnot. But boy, they sure had some good teams. We're gonna bring somebody in right now that football, maybe a historian, kind of like I am. Todd Corder, one of our contributors to the show, is here with us for a few moments. Todd, kind of sad news this morning when we get the news that one of the greats, if not the best football coach in professional history, Don Shula, passed away at the age of 90.
Lou, good afternoon to you. It is a very sad day. This guy, he was my favorite NFL coach of all time. He did it the right way. He was from Ohio. He's born in Grand River, Ohio. He went to Painesville, Ohio, Harvey High School. He went to John Carroll College, which is right out of Cleveland. Played for the Browns under Paul Brown. Played for the Colts. Played 1 year for the Redskins, and he was a defensive coordinator here in Detroit from 60 to 62. and the head coach of the Baltimore Colts from 63 to 69, and then he was with the Dolphins for 25 years. I mean, two-time Super Bowl champion. He was an NFL champion in 68 with Baltimore. I mean, you could go on and on and on. With the accolades, you can do a whole show with the accolades. Most wins as a head coach. He had 27 interceptions and 21 interceptions in his playing career as a defensive back. I mean, won the most games ever in NFL history, 347 wins, and in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And he did it the right way. I mean, I never heard a negative word, not one. And I'm hoping that I was hoping nobody would pass this 347 wins, but Bill Belichick surely has a shot at it. But very sad day today, and the fact he was a defensive coordinator for the Lions, I'm thinking, boy, what would Detroit have done if they would have got him?
Well, I know hindsight's 20/20. We're joined by Todd Corder, one of our regular contributors to the show, and you talk about he went to John Carroll, I believe, in Cleveland, and he's donated so much money. And I know a couple of guys that I went to college with that call MIAA conference football games, and they've gone to that stadium, and they say it rivals any D1 program stadium as far as not maybe as big, but the up-to-date of, the modern things. He's always made sure that they were ahead of the curve at that university with their stadium. And, you could see him walking the sidelines. He was kind of like Tom Landry. He just had that air about him. Very classy. You never saw him, out screaming at the referees. You never saw him grabbing somebody by the face mask and chastising them in public like that. There was just an air of class and confidence about him. And I'll tell you, anybody that can take a team with David Woodley to the Super Bowl at quarterback, I mean, that tells you how good of a coach he really was.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, the only coach with a perfect season, won 2 Super Bowls, like we mentioned earlier, had been in other Super Bowls. He was 0-2 in Super Bowls, and the pressure was on him to get his first Super Bowl win against the Redskins. And I remember that game. I'm old enough to remember it. I know exactly where I was when I was watching it. And up 14-0, and when Gary Yepremian tried to put the football out of his hands, and the Redskins picked that thing off and went all the way back for a touchdown, I just said, goodness golly, is that going to hang on here? I mean, I'm 8 years old, and I'm thinking, this is really cool. This is a perfect season. Are they going to hang on? I mean, holy smokes.
And it was an afternoon game on a Sunday. It's like I said at the top of the show, I can remember the first Super Bowl he coached with the Dolphins. They lost to the Cowboys, I believe. We were watching it in our basement on a 12-inch black and white TV on a Sunday afternoon in January. And, it's so funny how he has evolved with the game. He was on the competition committee for 28 years, and he helped mold the game to the way it is today. And it's funny, I was reading one of his favorite quotes when asked, what luck meant to his career, and he said, luck is always involved. What did he say? Something to the effect of, luck means a lot in football, and not having a good quarterback is bad luck. And just one of his quotes. And, he just an icon, and it is a sad day.
There's no question about it. It's an absolute terrible day, and we're in the middle of this pandemic. You mean his funeral is going to be potentially online? I mean, I tell you what, this is sad for the family, for all his former players, his friends, everyone. I'll tell you what, though, I bet when this is all said and done, he'll have a football stadium memorial where they'll pack the football stadium and where the Dolphins play down in South Florida. They'll pack that thing for a memorial. They could easily pack it.
Oh, 100%. They'll get 80,000 for that. No doubt about it.
Probably, I mean, wherever they hosted it,
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't matter if he packed. He was that beloved. And, just golly, I just remember having Dan Marino quarterback, and I thought, they'll be back to the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be back. And, and it was Marino's only Super Bowl appearance.
Well,
That was rough for the Dolphins. They haven't really had, had Jimmy Johnson there for a little while, but they really haven't had an established head coach or quarterback since then. And I think now they actually, fast forwarding today, I think they may have that today.
And I think he was, like I said, he quit coaching reluctantly back in the 90s. They went through an ownership change and management change. It just makes you wonder what these guys come in, what were they thinking? Now, it worked okay for Dallas when they had all of theirs, when they got rid of Landry for, a couple extra Super Bowls, but they've been mediocre the last 25 years. But, sometimes it just goes to show you the grass isn't always greener, once you make that change.
I'll never. You know who called the Super Bowl? It was the late Kurt Gowdy.
Mm-hmm.
You and I remember his voice like it was nothing, like it was yesterday. I can still hear his voice calling that game right now.
And I look at his team that he had in Baltimore, and they're talking about it. He had Bill Arnsparger and Chuck Noll was on his defensive coaching staff. And just you think of all the other coaches that were under him throughout the years. And like you said, when he was with the Lions, it's funny is you've got two of the top three coaches of all time as far as wins were assistant coaches with the Lions. He and Bill Belichick in the 70s with the Lions. I mean, it's a scary thought to think our Detroit Lions is as bad as they've been for 60 years, have had two of the greatest coaches on their coaching staffs.
Bill Parcells was the other, correct?
I think so.
It was Bill Parcells. Yes, they had him on the staff. Hey, do you remember the halftime show of that? You probably don't, but the only reason I do, it was the Michigan marching band at halftime during that Super Bowl.
Wow.
That's the only reason I remember it.
Well, that's a good enough reason for me to remember it. Why not?
That's why I brought it up. But I mean, shifting back to Super Bowl, when they lost to the Jets, man, that was he was he was coach of the Colts, and that's what ultimately led him to Miami.
Yeah.
I mean, he should have been. He should have stayed he should have been in Baltimore for his whole career.
Yeah. Well, Todd, it is a sad day. Well, now we've got the memories to look back on with Don, and he again was great for the game. Like I mentioned, he was on the coaching committee for 20 some years, and and he, like I said, was a stickler for playing by the rules. His teams were always one of the least penalized teams, and they always seem to get into the playoffs. And it's going to be – there's a reason why they pop the corks every year to celebrate that undefeated season, because I think it's going to be a while yet before you see a team go, which is going to be now 20-0 in the regular season.
That champagne, Tom Brady was just on – Peyton Manning was on TV. I think the last appearance Don Shula made was when they all, popped the champagne together with Mercury Morris and Nick Bonaconti and all the rest of them. I think it was Nick Bonaconti that was on there. No, it was Larry Zonka. And they're all popping the champagne together because they still have the perfect season.
Oh, that's funny. Well, Todd, I got to let you go. We got someone coming up in about 10 minutes.
Before you let me go, I got one tricky question. I'm so sorry, but I had
That's
to
all
ask
right.
it.
Go right ahead.
When Mike Bass batted it in the air, and when the pass was batted in the when your parents' pass was batted in the air, and Redskins cornerback Mike Bass picked it off and returned it 49 yards for the touchdown. That was Gary O's former teammate. On what team did they play for together?
Oh, it had to have been the Detroit Lions.
That's why I did this, because I knew you would get it.
Yeah, he was the kicker.
It was Detroit Lions, that's correct.
Kicker before Errol Mann.
Remaining in the fourth quarter.
Oh,
that's
heck
correct.
Yeah. You know, so the Lions got to get the Super Bowl somehow. They got to be a little bit of history in the Super Bowl. That's unfortunately the only way they can get it.
Well, hopefully one day that'll change in the future. Lou, thanks for having me on today.
Hey, Todd, thanks for coming on such short notice. It's always great talking to you, and good luck with your shows this week as well.
Hey, thanks a lot. You take care of yourself.
All right, you
Bye
too.
now.
Bye-bye. Todd Corder, one of our special contributors to the show here on the Captain Lou Extravaganza. Again, a sad day with Don Shula, the word of Don Shula passing away at the age of 90. Again, he's a legend. I'm sure Jeff Disher, our guest at the bottom of the hour, will discuss it with him, his recollections of the Dolphins. I know not all great memories for him, because I think maybe one of their wins was against the Minnesota Vikings. I'd have to look it up at the break, but tough day for Miami Dolphins fans and NFL fans. For those of us that watched the Dolphins back in the heyday of the 70s and the 80s, you know, the iconic, again, the way he patrolled the sidelines, always just had that stoic look, you know, just his chin up, just kind of a lot of times with his arms folded, you know, it really was pretty cool just to see him on. And so again, Don Shula passing away at the age of 90. Lots to talk about yet today. We're going to take a 60-second break. When we come back, we'll touch on The Last Dance and some other NFL news. Jeff Disher is scheduled to join us at the bottom of the hour. So don't go anywhere. You're watching the Captain Lou Extravaganza live here on the 12-Ounce Sports Network.
Esports are here to stay. Go to jazzsports.ag, log into your account, and look for our new esports section on the top of your screen. Browse through all the different available matches and watch them live with our exclusive esports betting platform. Get instant access to game results, pending and graded bet reports, outright bet types, and upcoming match schedules, all at the easy reach of your fingertips. Jazz Sports puts you in the game.
Drinkade, ready for distribution worldwide.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Captain Lou Extravaganza live here on the 12-Ounce Sports Network. Yours truly, Captain Lou, in the chair until 2 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon. Want to thank everybody for taking the time out here to join us on 12 Ounce as we roll along on this May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. How's that? Again, the sad news today with the passing of Don Shula this morning at the age of 90 years old, an icon in the NFL and the football world and the sports world in general. 36 years, I believe, he was head coach, or 33 years as head coach in the National Football League. And he just, what a run with the Miami Dolphins. Gosh, again, for those of us that were around back in the 70s and 80s and in the early 90s, just that stoic figure walking the sidelines. And they were always in the playoffs, always. Them, Pittsburgh, Oakland, they were the mainstays in the AFC. And you could always count on them. And they weren't always successful in the playoffs, but they were always there. And to me, that was the sign of a great coach. And I hope that you get a chance, look at his, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of highlight videos and whatnot about him and his teams. And again, as I mentioned, if you can take a David Woodley-led team to the Super Bowl at quarterback, you got to be doing something right, with all due respect. and, of course, the great Bob Greasy, the bespectacled one, and Dan Marino. The crazy thing about that with Dan, rookie year, getting to the Super Bowl, and then that's it. But a lot of championship game appearances in the AFC for him and Don Shula in the Miami Dolphins. A couple other news stories in the NFL. They're not going to do the international games this year. No surprise there. So Jacksonville will get to play all of their games. They had 2 of them slated for over in London or in England. So all 4 games over in England are going to be gone. And they're going to be here local this year if they do indeed have a season. The game in Mexico is going to be played in the United States, so not much of a surprise there. Andy Dalton getting signed by the Cowboys for $3 million a year with the option up to make it up to 7, I guess, with incentives. And does this put any pressure on any leverage against Dak Prescott maybe signing? I don't know if I go along. I don't know if I agree 100% with that. I want to thank Mark Ashley for watching us here. He shot me a text message saying they should have had the Spartan band on at halftime of that Super Bowl. So there you go, Mark. You know what? They got to have the best ones on there, I guess, right? So anyways, I want to thank Mark for taking time out of his lunch hour to watch us here this afternoon. Getting back to Andy Dalton, does it give any leverage for Jerry Jones against Dak Prescott? I just think it's great. It just goes to the proof that you've got to have a solid backup in there, if just in case. I mean, look what happened to Detroit last year to a smaller extent. Once Stafford went down, Detroit never won another game. So that just shows you how valuable they are. Oh, pardon me. I don't have a sneeze button for the screen. But anyways, so Andy Dalton, $3 million with incentives. It could be up to $7 million. Dallas, I'll tell you, they've got all the pieces in place. No excuses now. Oh, pardon me. So I guess I'm allergic to winning quarterbacks or something. With Dak Prescott, as I mentioned, will he sign his tender now? Will he still get that extension? What kind of leverage will he have? I think Dallas should sign him, but I also don't know if he's really worth all that kind of money that he wants, $40 million. I've said it before. I think he should sign the tender, the franchise tender. And, next year he'll be making over $40 million if he does that again, going the Kirk Cousins route. The Last Dance last night, good show again. It just shows you what I took out of that last night. Again, you always have heard about Michael Jordan, his competitive nature in anything. And what really impressed me, or I don't know, the impression that I got out of the show last night was the way he used his narcissistic tendencies to his benefit, as far as just hating to lose to anybody better than anybody else, taking any situation and using it to his advantage. Clyde Drexler, how they were comparing Clyde to him in their first, or in 92. And he just tore Clyde Drexler apart in that playoff series, or in that championship series. Tony Kukoc in the Olympics in the first time they played him. Getting him and Scottie Pippen to just tear him to shreds in that opening game. Charles Barkley, using that as motivation because Barkley won the MVP of the regular season. And Barkley was right. Barkley had a better year in the regular season over Michael. But Michael had the it factor to use that and top it off a notch. And then digging really deep against Phoenix, saying that Krause liked Dan Marley so much that he had to use that as a motivation, and it worked, and they were just dynamic. Well, right now, let's go back to our phone line, and we've got one of our regular contributors to our show, Jeff Disher, on the other end. Jeff, how are you, my friend?
First of all, Louie, 2 words for you. Sparty on. Secondly, the quote that you're looking Secondly, the quote that you're looking for from Don Shula says, "Sure, luck means a lot in football. Not having a good quarterback is bad luck."
Well, there you go. That's the one. I had it at the tip of my tongue, and I forgot it right before I came on the air. That's what I get for not writing it down. So how are you, my friend? How's everything in your world?
Well, another day above ground and vertical in Minnesota, and I was listening to the first segment, and I have to say I'm not sour as far as Shula and his relation to the Vikings with the Dolphins back in '72 with that perfect season, but I was looking at the perfect seasons since the NFL instituted their playoff system in 1930, what was it, 2?
Uh-huh.
And the 2007 New England Patriots was who you referenced.
Yep.
But you have to go back to 1934 and 1942, both Chicago Bears undefeated seasons, to get the other 2 of those 4.
Those were dynamic teams back then. There's no doubt about it if you're a historian, and I've read up on them quite a bit. That 42 team was amazing, and I know from the Super Bowl era, like I said, those are the 2 only undefeated teams, and, you know, that Dolphins team was amazing, and like I was saying at the top, you know, when you've got a team like that and you only win the Super Bowl 14-7, nothing's easy. Boy, you thought with that kind of a dominant team, it might have been a little bit of an easier win in the Super Bowl.
Logic would say that, but then again, do we live in a logical world?
No, we don't. So, hey, I wanted to bring something up before we go any further. I was reading something the other day that involved one of your Minnesota teams, and it was the Twins. I was reading something on the MLB Network or MLB.com, and the 10 strangest trades in baseball history. And the number 2 strangest trade happened in 1994, and it involved your Twins.
Yep. Go ahead.
The Dave Winfield for a steak dinner trade.
I'm just reading. Yeah,
and
I'm just reading about that right now, but yep, go ahead.
So Cleveland got him. There was supposed to be a player to be named later from Minnesota, but because of the strike, it never happened. So instead, the Indians took all the Twins executives out for a nice meal. And I'll tell you what, and they said if a steak was anywhere near as good as Winfield, it must have been a heck of a meal. So just one of the stranger trades in baseball history. But that was a strange time back in the 90s with baseball. And if you would have told me that a strike would have wiped out a World Series, I don't know. I would have thought that they would have settled back then.
Now, you know I'm a bit of a historian with the project that I'm doing on my end on the radio, but with the strangest trades in MLB history, I'm reading one that is sort of Twins related, but before the Washington Senator franchise drifted here to Minneapolis, and I'm going back to 1924 when a pitcher by the name of Joe Martina threw for the Senators, and in 1921, Dallas, who was a team, I believe, in the what would be the National League at that time, I'd have to look it up, traded him to a team in New Orleans for 2 barrels of oysters, which brought about his nickname as Oyster Joe Martina.
That's right. That was under number 7.
7th on that list.
Yeah. Or, it's funny is, $100 in a bag of baseballs in that one trade back in the day, back in 1983 with Keith Comstock. It's always fun to look at those things. But let's get back to right now.
Yep.
Again, we'll talk about the draft here real quick because I haven't had you on since the draft was over. I thought your Vikings did very well, and they were rewarded as one of the top teams this year for the moves that they've made ever since the trade with Buffalo, getting rid of Diggs, and then some of the other trades they made on draft weekend. And I thought they did real well with the opening round. Give me your thoughts on the Vikings round 1 of the draft.
Well, and we've talked about how much of a, if you'll excuse the phrase, of a hard-on I have with Joe Burrow, because every eyeball in the U.S. was glued to that LSU team last year.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a look at Justin Jefferson, the Vikings received a top-notch wide receiver who was on par with Burrow in terms of leading that LSU Tiger team to the promised land last year. Jefferson played in all 15 games for the Tigers, and if you remember the national semifinal, he had 14 balls, 227 yards, and 4 touches against Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And also, no, that's just a video tweet from the Vikings. It would be, I forget who they played in the national championship game, but he's the 7th receiver from LSU to be drafted in the opening round. And you have to go back to 2014, a guy by the name of OBJ to get the last one. And we all know what Beckham had to do to put himself on the map. And it's something that we've talked about here with his catch against Dallas in a Sunday night game. I believe it would be 20, I want to say it was 15.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I like too about the Vikings, Jeff, is that they also were able to pick up an impact player in Gladney in the first round. And when you can get 2 potential starters and make a trade to do that, I think that was a great move by the Vikings.
I agree. And I won't mention the utter, what's the phrase I want to use? I won't mention the NFC North as a division taking a dump when it comes to the playoffs, but I do believe that the Vikings are one to watch out for here in the region come hopefully an NFL season.
Well, I've got them. I did my top 10 last week, and I had them at number 5. When I do top 10s like that, I always go. I put in part mostly for a good portion of what they did last year until somebody can knock them off. And I think right now that Kansas City, Baltimore, and San Francisco are the top 3 teams. After that, I think you could make a case for the next 10 or 11 teams to be 4th through 15. And I think Minnesota's right in there. It's now we just need. I know that Kirk Cousins. His knock is that he hasn't won a lot of big games. He has won a playoff game. Now he's got to take that next step, just like Dak Prescott. Both guys, I think, have a good team behind them. Now they've got to prove it.
And that proof comes with making the right decision at the right time. And I'm interested to see how that is reflected on the football field later this summer or into the fall, depending on how things shake out otherwise.
Well, like I said, and I think that I wasn't real impressed with the Bears with what they did. The Packers, I still can't figure out what their thinking is. I know they want to get a quarterback for the future, but immediate help, I don't think they gave themselves any, and I think that they may take a step back. And like I said, if Minnesota ever had a chance to win this division, I think this year is the year.
Can we touch on Green Bay for a second?
Absolutely.
And what draft what drafting a quarterback in the first round basically tells you if you are Aaron Rodgers. It is, in my mind, that tells me if I'm Rodgers, that either Green Bay wants to shove me out the door and let me play elsewhere on a team that wants me, or they don't see me lasting longer in Green Bay than, I don't know, maybe a season or 2 seasons, and either that or you play elsewhere or you retire early. And I don't think Rodgers is anywhere close in terms of his physical form to wanting to retire early. So I think that leaves a bitter taste in the mouth of Aaron Rodgers by drafting the quarterback that the Packers did in the first round.
Well, I agree with that 100% because I think he's going to also look back at when he was drafted. What did Favre do for him? Now, is he going to be the company guy and help out? I don't think he's going to. But you don't have to. I don't know. You can lead or you can mentor a guy just by your own play. By that I mean that if Jordan Love is as good and as smart of a quarterback as they think he is, he'll just watch. He can watch and learn. But I agree. I think that the one thing that's going to be holding Aaron Rodgers back from leaving the Packers for at least 2 years is going to be the dead cap money that follows him. I think, what is it, $30 million next year would be dead cap money. And I don't know if Green Bay is willing to swallow that much. I think it's going to be 3 years before Rodgers leaves unless, there's some kind of a crazy trade and they can circumvent the cap.
I don't even know. I'm speechless. I don't even know where to go. Like and if it were me, I would have that bad taste in my mouth, but I wouldn't be. I would maybe voice that concern to Packers management, and sadly, the unfortunate thing is, if I voice that concern, I get shipped out quicker. So I think I dare say Rodgers is going to, in part, swallow his pride maybe for a season, but I also see him speaking out about his treatment in the draft last week and voicing his displeasure with how the Packers drafted Jordan Love. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sure he will, and I think
you too.
Hell, thank you. God, I'm telling you. All of a sudden, I got the sneezes here this afternoon. I think that if there's anybody that we've known throughout the last decade or so that's played with a chip on their shoulder and done it quite well, is Aaron Rodgers. And I think that he could take the Michael Jordan mentality and elevate his game where, he's using it as a crutch to try to do better. And that could benefit Green Bay, but I don't understand why they didn't go after a Justin Jefferson or somebody like that, trade up in the draft to get a wideout. And I look at that and I just don't see how Green Bay improved for the right now. And maybe they are sending a signal. Maybe LaFleur and Gutenhurst, they don't like. I don't know. They've got their own way of thinking for what they want to do, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens up in Packerland for sure.
And you mentioned the Michael Jordan analogy. I think that's a perfect segue into what we saw last night in The Last Dance, where you talked about one of the Olympic trips, and I think it was Barcelona. Mm-hmm. I want to say it was Dream Team in one of the episodes. So 92.
Yep.
And one of the big takeaways from that for me was I never knew Isaiah Thomas got essentially clowned by Michael Jordan's influence to USA Basketball, which kept him off the Dream Team squad with Jordan, John Sally, and others that went on to an Olympic championship in '92.
Yeah, it was evident right after that, and I think, and Jordan can say that they never came out and asked him, but he's, when they were talking to him about it, they said, well, he didn't want him on there, but he didn't come right out and say it, and some of the other players didn't want him. And what was telling to me, Jeff, about that was how so-called friends like Magic Johnson and some of the others wouldn't come to his defense. Now, again, to Magic's defense, I know that Isaiah had made some references because it was right after Magic came out that he had HIV. So back then he had made some rather unflattering references to Magic's sexuality, which that didn't go over good. And, I've thought a lot about it the last couple of weeks with the Dream Team. I was very upset with Magic, and I still am a little bit for not sticking up for him and trying to make a case for him. But as it sounds like, not a lot of the other players wanted him. Now, Barkley said this morning that they never asked him. It's to the point now where who's going to come out and say, yes, I didn't want Isaiah on the team? Nobody's going to actually come out and say it. So they're going to, if anything, they're going to blame each other. But, it's hard to argue with the results of that Dream Team.
But also, Isaiah was at that point, pre-Olympics, 1992, Isaiah was 3 years removed, I believe, either 3 or 4 years removed from walking off the court in, I want to say it was the '89 Eastern Conference Final, where Detroit played Chicago, and they walked off with 7.9 seconds to play in the game.
That was 91. That was in 91 in the Eastern Conference Final.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I spotted 2 years. But that's a horrible image for you to be a part of if you're Isaiah Thomas, and in a sense, I dare say it tarnished, at least in part, his career as an individual player.
Well, here's my thing. And, it's like Isaiah said last week, and I'm not going to be an Isaiah Thomas apologist. Do I think he should have been on the team? Yes, I do. And I didn't watch the Olympics because of it, because I knew that, number one, the games weren't going to be competitive. I knew America was going to roll. But if that's the main reason why he wasn't on the team, then shame on Chuck Daly. As much as I love Daddy Rich, shame on Chuck Daly, shame on Magic Johnson, shame on everybody else, shame on Michael Jordan, because I think Michael was behind it. He hated Isaiah, but you want to know why he hated him more than that, I believe, is because Isaiah had the upper hand on him, the competitor that Michael Jordan is still to this day. Isaiah he had the upper hand on him. He had the upper hand on Magic and on Larry Bird towards the end. And those guys didn't like him because of that. Plus, they were borderline dirty, and they played it very hard on him. And Pippen didn't like him either. So, and that's one of the reasons why. But if the only reason is because of not shaking their hands, and I think that was Bush League. So. And I agree with you. And I believe we saw evidence of of more aggressive play from Michael in that scrimmage in Monte Carlo, number one. Yeah.
In the Dream Team episode, but also there was an instance with, I want to say it was Kukoc back in Chicago in the late episode, I'll call it, where Michael saw something that he didn't enjoy, and he had to physically press his teammates into playing, I'll go so far as to say, quote unquote, the Bulls way.
Yeah. Oh, what I liked about the show yesterday was his, like I said at the top, he had a narcissistic way to him, but he used that to his benefit. And he used that to propel him. He didn't want anybody to be better than him. And even reaching in that 93 final, it's against Dan Marley because Krause liked him. Now, Dan Marley went to my alma mater, Central Michigan, so I had a special liking for him. But to see if Magic to go to those lengths to a guy that he definitely was better than, but just because Krause liked him, he took him to school just like he took Kukoc in the Olympics, man. It really fascinated me what, every little thing he used just to motivate himself to be the best, how he hated to be considered second best.
Right. But if you go back further to before Phil Jackson was with the Bulls organization, Doug Collins made sure that Michael Jordan was the so-called best player on the Bulls teams of the late '80s because the offense was centered around him. When Phil came in in the early '90s as an assistant, that's when Chicago transitioned to the triangle and, dare I say, became even more effective than they were in the Collins era.
Oh, 100%. And I give Michael Jordan credit for, not wanting to be the man all the time because he knew that's what it took to win. Also, he knew that they had to get mentally tougher, physically tougher too, because Detroit manhandled them. Let's face it. And I think that's another reason why he hated Isaiah. And it's funny because he took his ball literally and went home when Collins got fired. But, Krause wanted Phil Jackson and he wanted Tex Ritter. He wanted that triangle offense. But it's amazing to me that how these egos clashed towards the end with Phil Jackson and Krause. And, because, not giving him, the spotlight towards the end. And even when they won that, I think it was their second world championship, how Krause made sure that him and Reinsdorf got as much credit as the team, which I just found that fascinating that he would do that in that time.
But also, you look at that, and you remember the pieces where Krause came out in the media and said 97-98, I believe it was to be his last year, and he made the statement in such a spectacular way that it took away from what Chicago was doing at the time. I believe they were on a several game win streak at the time, and it was up to Jordan, Pip, and the others to get at least the team back on track.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't understand why he would do that. Why he would cause distractions like that. The only thing I can think of is Chicago did great. The team was doing fantastic, and Jerry Krause had an ego that just would not allow him to stay out of the spotlight. He wanted to always let people know that he was, in his mind, the reason why Chicago was as great as they was. And my other question is with Reinsdorf not doing anything about it.
Right. I fully agree with you there. And I'm just looking back at the 97-98 regular season. The Bulls won 62 games that year and finished, I believe it was 7 games ahead of Miami, but you had a Reggie Miller-led Indiana Pacers squad that finished 11 games behind the Bulls. Mm-hmm. That's how great the Bulls were in the Eastern Conference that year. But looking at it top to bottom, I don't think the Eastern Conference back that season, back in the mid-90s, was as great as they were in the early 2010s, pre Eddie, or not Eddie Curry. That's another Bull for another time. I'm thinking Stephen Curry
Yep.
led Golden State Warriors squads these last few years.
And it's funny, and I got to let you go because we're just about out of time, is you watched Charles Barkley this morning, and he said that he thought that 93 team that beat them with Horace Grant was better than the later ones, and I disagree with that. I think the later teams that you mentioned with Rodman and Kerr and them, I thought were better. But, Jeff, I got to let it go. We're up near the top. Hey, thanks for coming on and sharing some stories again. We'll get you on real soon. Keep staying safe, and again, thank you for coming on.
You do the same, my friend. Always a pleasure.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Jeff Disher from Dish on the Fox, or Dish in the Vox. That is his Twitter handle. Check him out. He's always got a lot of great stuff that he's working on. He's indeed a historian in the sports world out of the Minneapolis area. Well, we got a couple minutes left, as I mentioned. Again, that documentary, The Last Dance, it is fascinating to watch, and I will always respect Michael for his game. And, you know, towards the end of that first run, and that's where they're about, you know, the first 3 years, the gambling and all the allegations and the loss of privacy really did start to take its toll on him, and you hear about it. And I'm not going to feel sorry for the guy. You know, he kind of put himself in that spot with his gambling and, you know, raising the questions and everything. And, you know, I do feel sorry a little bit about losing your privacy and everything, but that comes with the territory. That comes with all the perks. I will say that. You know, I've never walked a minute in his shoes, so I don't know what it's like. But it brought me back to a story that I remember reading. We'll finish the show with this. Back when I was going to school at Central Michigan back in the mid-'80s or late 80s, right before I graduated, I remember our local paper, the Central Michigan Life, the CM Life, they had a beat reporter that was in Chicago, and he was at a record store. Yeah, back when they used to sell records and CDs before all the downloading stuff you have now. Anyways, he was there, and in come a rather large fellow and stood right next to him, and they were both looking at albums. And he looked at him, and the reporter stood there, and he knew who it was right away. And he said, boy, what do I ask him? Do I ask him, do they think they're going to overtake the Pistons? Do I ask him how his basketball game? Do I ask him about Nikes? He says, or do I ask him about music? So I asked him about albums. And they talked for about 15 minutes, and it was indeed Michael Jordan. And he said right before he left, Michael turned around and shook his hand and said, thank you for not asking me any basketball questions. Thank you for just talking about music. So I always remember that. And then when I saw this at the end of the show, I wish I could remember the reporter from the CM Life, but it was, he said how he couldn't do that type of thing anymore. And you could just see the mental exhaustion on Michael Jordan at the end of the 3-year run, the first one. There's always going to be the gambling allegations of why. That's why he stepped aside for those 2 years. And maybe that's true. I think it's probably a combination of everything. That book that came out by Stan Smith and everything else. But boy, I'll tell you what, the way he would motivate himself, just taking certain things about certain players, Clyde Drexler, Dan Marley, because Jerry Krause liked him. And also Charles Barkley for getting the MVP ahead of him. Certain things, just taking those and just elevating himself to that next level. So anyways, that's going to do it. We'll be back on tomorrow night, normal time, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern time. Rod Peterson from the Rod Peterson Show is going to join us at 8:30. We're going to talk Canadian Football League and how all this coronavirus and everything, the pandemic, has affected Canadian sports. Really looking forward to talking to Rod tomorrow night at 8:30. But after that, we've got a lot more in store. That's tomorrow night, 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern time here on the Captain Lou Extravaganza. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We will talk to you tomorrow night. And as always, keep your heads up, keep your feet moving, keep your sticks down, and keep your minds open. Thanks for joining us here on the show. We'll see you tomorrow. This is the Captain Lou Extravaganza live on the 12 Ounce Sports Network.